Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, we are going to be reviewing the Lilo and Stitch TV show in preparation for the live action remake coming out this week. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Now, I actually really liked this TV show. Sure, it was pretty simplistic. The basic concept is that since Stitch is experiment 626, that means that there are 625 previous experiments. After the pilot movie Stitch, which I actually reviewed earlier, all of those experiments were unleashed on Hawaii, and now in every episode of the series, Lilo and Stitch go on an adventure to track down the missing experiments, and then they try to turn the experiments to good, at which point they bring them to the one true place where they truly belong. And for the most part, they actually do a really good job with this. Of course, there are still a lot of basic experiments, like the kind that help set up basic cartoon tropes, like character swapping bodies or losing their memories. My personal favorite being when Lilo transports herself to the future. But of course, there's also a lot of other brand new unique experiments that bring something totally different from other cartoon shows, and I really like that. However, one thing that I didn't really like was the animation. I would say that the animation quality has definitely taken a downhill climb. This is probably the worst animation out of the entire Lilo and Stitch franchise. First off, the backgrounds are just watercolor and they don't really fit with what's going on with the characters. And with the characters themselves, their movement isn't exactly fluid, and they're often changing proportion sizes, which is not good. Of course, what do you expect? This is a TV show. It's going to be made with a TV show budget, and that means that there's definitely going to be some problems with the animation. So with that in mind, let's talk about the voice acting, which I admit is really good, especially considering they got most of the voice actors to come back from the original movie, which is extremely good. And then, of course, there's the music, which unfortunately isn't that great. You got some cool instrumental music here and there, but unfortunately, it suffered drastically. I think for the most part because they couldn't afford any Elvis songs, and maybe just because, aside from the theme song, they didn't really want to include any pop songs. Of course, there is the problem of overarching story. Honestly, the overarching story is relatively simple. It's just, we go on an adventure in one episode, then a different adventure in the next. There's really no overarching story, aside from the fact that it's just one long series of adventures. And because of that, well, there really isn't a lot of consistency with the show. For instance, some experiments will show up in one episode, and then a couple of episodes later, their experiment pod will be activated by getting wet and thus hydrating their dehydrated pod. And well, unfortunately, that just means that there's a lot of inconsistencies and that the episodes are out of order. And that's not really that great. So, if you ask me, the best way to watch the series is to start with the Cannonball episode, and then after that, you can probably just watch it and get a gist of what's going on. And then eventually, I recommend ending the series with the episode Snafu. Mostly because Snafu happens to be probably the best way to have a series finale, aside from the fact that there's also another movie that they made that serves as the series finale called Leroy and Stitch. I will actually be doing a review on that later, but for now we're talking about the TV show. Now, of course, Lilo and Stitch are going around collecting experiments with the assistance of Jumba as well as Pleakley, and then there's Nani, who doesn't really help out too much, but she does take on that big sister role, and she's always working, so maybe she has an excuse to not be in the series. And then there's David, who unfortunately isn't played by his movie voice actor, but what are you gonna do? Thankfully, he's not in the series too often, but when he does show up, it's always a treat because he actually actually does something with his character. Otherwise, he's kind of just an extra that's best left forgotten, and that's kind of sad for his character, but again, I can't really imagine him bringing anything to the table. So, with that in mind, I like how they handled David. And of course, I really love how they kept the characters consistent with how they show up in the movies. Lilo is super weird, and she's trying to make friends with her hula class, even though it's clear her hula class hates her, mostly because of Myrtle, who constantly makes fun of her weirdness. And then, of course, there's Stitch, who, despite trying to go good, is still doing acts of mischief and destruction, as well as getting into trouble because he wants to have a little bit of fun. And I really like that they kept that part of his character instead of just making him go straight good. Not only because it makes his character funny, but because it makes his redemption arc more believable. He still has destructive urges, but he always apologizes every time he causes chaos. I also really like how creative they were with the experiments. Yeah, they had to create 625 experiments for this series, and well, we don't even see 100 of them because there's only 65 episodes, but I do like how some of the episodes have multiple experiments showing up. So even if we don't even see 100, I like how unique and different each experiment is from the other. Of course, there are a couple that are like basic fire enemies, and well, it's a little weird how repetitive the superpowers that the experiments have get, but thankfully their designs are what makes them stand out and stay apart from the other, and that's what's really good about this series. However, as I was saying, Lilo and Stitch are experiment hunting so that they can turn them good and bring them to their one true place, but of course they have an adversary in Captain Gantu, who is working with Dr. Jacques von Hamsterville so that he can capture the many experiments and bring them to Hamsterville, who is still currently in prison. But unfortunately, Captain Gantu just keeps being thwarted by Lilo and Stitch. There are times where he gets away with the experiments, but they're super rare, and eventually, in the Snafu episode, all of those experiments are freed by Lilo and Stitch, so there's that. But honestly, I hate to say this, I am actually very sorry for Gantu. He's just a guy trying to do his job, and his job happens to be a bounty hunter, so he's technically evil, but I just feel sorry for the guy. He lives alone on a spaceship that's crash landed with a super lazy experiment who is super powerful, but again, so lazy to the point where all he thinks about is sandwiches, and it just drives me bonkers how lazy this experiment 625 is, and how even though he's kind of like a therapist buddy for Gantu, he unfortunately also constantly makes fun of Gantu, and that's really sad.
He is hated by pretty much everyone.
Oh yeah, I hate him tons.
And then of course there's Hamsterville, who constantly abuses Gantu.
Gantu, you landlocked citizen, why have you not reported?
I hate my life.
If you did not bring me an experiment soon, I will abuse you physically as well as verbally.
Understood, sir.
And I'm pretty sure that he fired Gantu 5 times throughout the series, but then Gantu finds some way to get his job back because Hamsterville's plot is thwarted by Lilo and Stitch, and of course, well, Gantu's also getting his butt kicked by Lilo and Stitch in almost every single episode. So with all that in mind, I just feel sorry for Gantu. During the first season, he seems open to experiment hunting, like, there's a new experiment, I gotta go to work. But then during the second season, he's so mellow and sad, and it's kind of pathetic, and I just feel sorry for the guy. And of course, also during the second season, there are a few differences from the first season, like how Jumba and Pleakley have opened a bed and not breakfast, you know, like a bed and breakfast, but they don't serve breakfast. And they're doing it so they can help Nani make money, which is good because of all the destruction the experiments cause. Also, Lilo's voice actress went through puberty in between seasons 1 and 2, so her voice was lower for season 2, but we can't really blame the the show for that. However, one thing I really want to congratulate the show on is by introducing a new character, Victoria, who is this new girl who moved to Hawaii and joined Lilo's hula class. So now Lilo technically has a friend who doesn't think she's weird, and I love that. Then, of course, there's also the fact that there's a couple of crossover episodes with a couple of other Disney Channel TV shows. Now, I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen any of those TV shows, but I would say that I liked the crossovers. There was the Proud Family, the Recess characters, of course there was also Kim Possible, and then my personal favorite was American Dragon Jake Long. I really gotta watch that show. But because of those crossovers, that technically means that those 4 shows take place in the same universe as Lilo and Stitch, and I just think that's pretty cool. I love how there's always these little Easter eggs that prove there's a Disney universe, but Disney still hasn't confirmed what that universe actually looks like. So anyway, in summary, this show is really good. It's funny, it's creative with the experiments designs, and it has some pretty good writing. And well, I do like the fact that you kind of feel sorry for the villain Gantu, and you kind of want to root for him to win, even if it means Lilo and Stitch would lose. And I just think that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, he still has to lose at the end of the day, so I don't know. But anyway, I do like the fact that you don't need to watch the entire series in order to make sense of the show. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you can just turn on the Lilo and Stitch TV show at any episode and you would still understand the plot as long as you watch the Stitch movie first. So, with that in mind, be sure to check out the show if you haven't already, and for those of you who have seen it, who is your favorite experiment? And be sure to leave your thoughts down below on what you think of the TV show. And with that in mind, be sure to subscribe so that you can keep an eye out for when I review the Leroy and Stitch series finale, and of course, the live-action movie that's coming out this Friday. And of course, feel free to join my membership program by clicking the join button down below and help support the channel further. But with all that in mind, I hope that you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
This mint scent really perks you up. Let's see how Toasted Flower Garden makes you feel. It makes you very, very angry. Fascinating.